It is time to get into Monday's headlines today. But before that, Phil, we may as well focus on what happened last night. Adrian Barry says that there wasn't a huge amount of significance attached to last night. But let me put this to you. How strong is the case for Kevin De Bruyne as Player of the Year after the evidence of last night? The clear evidence that he is the best footballer in the Premier League right now, when you even put him up against the Premier League champions, the runaway Premier League champions, it is clear that Kevin De Bruyne is still the best footballer in the Premier League. Can you make a case for him, a legitimate case for him as Player of the Year?
Yeah, welcome back, Owen. Yeah, of course he can. I mean, he was brilliant last night, and he tends to be brilliant most weeks. But I suppose the argument you could make against him is that he's playing in a team that are 20 points off the Premier League champions, and you'd wonder if he's that amazing a player, why aren't City doing well? But as well, you kind of got an insight, even in the first 15 minutes of last night's game, and obviously at Stamford Bridge last week, that as good as City are, the way they stroke the ball around, there's vulnerabilities there. There was times, obviously, Mendy has been in the team, and as good as he is going forward, he just isn't part of that unit the way he tends to play players on. He was at fault, obviously, for the Pulisic goal last week as well. So De Bruyne is definitely in with a chance. Obviously, Mo Salah won it a couple of years ago when Liverpool didn't win the Premier League, so it wouldn't be unheard of for a player that's not from the league-winning team not to win it. So I don't know how it's going to come across this season, because obviously if the season had gone ahead as normal, the voting is quite early in the season anyway. So yeah, he's definitely in the mix. I suppose he's in the mix with Van Dijk. Henderson was one that was getting mentioned. I think I know Jamie Carragher mentioned Sadio Mane in commentary, that he was his player of the season. So I think they're the four that you're looking at.
Well, that was quite an extraordinary departure, I thought, Phil, for an actual Liverpool-aligned person to not say Jordan Henderson for Footballer of the Year. It was almost sacrilege that Jordan Henderson wasn't Jamie Carragher's Player of the Year, because it seemed that he is almost the unanimous choice when we've spoken about Player of the Year this year. And I'm not sure I actually understand that, Phil. Like, I get the aura of Jordan Henderson and how brilliant a captain he's been for Liverpool, but I don't think you can put him into the top 2 or 3 players for Liverpool this season. At a stretch, you could possibly pick 5 players who have been better performers for Liverpool in the Premier League this season, plus Kevin De Bruyne. Like Jordan Henderson, you could make a case as comes 7th in the running for Player of the Year. Like, has this become a bit of a runaway trend that perhaps we can't arrest at this point, that Jordan Henderson is going to get it because he is Captain Fantastic and it is based on the man of Jordan Henderson and the character of Jordan Henderson rather than the footballer that he is? Like, perhaps that's actually the way these things should be judged, but I'm just saying, if you're judging it on the performances this season, should he actually be in with a legitimate shout, because that's what he is?
Yeah, well, I think one way I've kind of looked at it, and the reason I wouldn't give it to Henderson is because I would look at the impact of what would happen to Liverpool if Henderson was out of the team, or if Van Dijk was out of the team, or Mane was out of the team. Of those 3 players I've mentioned, the player that Liverpool could cope without the most, I think, is Jordan Henderson. I think if you take Mane out, then Liverpool obviously aren't as potent in attack. And then if you take Van Dijk out, they're a lot more vulnerable at the back. And they obviously have cover in midfield. They can play. They've a number of options in there. So I think what's impressed people about Henderson this season is just his leadership and, you know, just that drive that he has and the standard that he sets. And if a player isn't on it, you know, he'll bark at them. And I think that's where they're some of his strongest attributes. And, you know, he's come up with some big moments in certain games. I think back to the Spurs game where he was at fault for the goal at Anfield that they conceded after a couple of minutes to Harry Kane. And, you know, he equalised in the second half, and obviously Liverpool went on to win the game. So, you know, he's a strong character, and he's obviously, you know, he's the voice of that Liverpool team. But no, I can certainly see why some people would go for him, but I can also think why you wouldn't go for him.
He has to win it, is the thing. Like, I understand the point. Is he technically the best footballer in the Premier League at the minute? Probably not. I don't know the criteria, as like with the All-Star Selection Committee, what are the actual criteria for this. But given what Jordan Henderson has achieved in terms of his role at that Liverpool team, and I know that he'd moved into favourite for the thing even before COVID, I believe. But like everything that he's done even since that, in terms of organising and pulling a lot of clubs together in terms of like raising money and awareness and all that sort of stuff. I just think you have to look at those factors.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think as well, there's obviously a lot of emphasis on these awards, and maybe probably too much. And I think obviously there's two of them. There's the Players Player of the Year, and there's the Football Writers. And the Football Writers one might be a better indicator because, from what you hear from players, that they're basically, there's a rep that comes into the dressing room, and some of them will openly talk to other players, like, who are you putting down? Who are you voting for? And they mightn't put that much thought into it. Whereas the Football Writers obviously will have seen all these players play for the whole season, and they will actually sit down and have a good think about it. So, saying that, Sterling got the Football Writers Player of the Year ahead of Van Dijk last season.
Yeah, he could be with a shout as well, actually, this season. We're going to get into Monday's headlines today, Phil, for anybody who hasn't seen this slot. I think you did pretty well last time we did this. You managed to predict a good few of the unexpected things that were going to happen. So basically, you're going to give us 4 lines that we're definitely going to see on the back pages of Monday's newspapers. Your first one, very briefly, because we've kind of touched on this already. Liverpool still have 100 points in sight thanks to home comforts. So Aston Villa on Sunday, Phil, is this going to be a cakewalk for a resurgent Liverpool after City putting them waking them up a little bit last night?
Yeah, it was a sobering night for Liverpool, and I think Villa, unfortunately, are going to feel the backlash of it. Obviously, Liverpool have won every home game in the league this season. They're going to want to continue that. Doesn't help that Villa are not Manchester City either, and Liverpool are a different animal at Anfield. And I'd say they'll be hurting a little bit. Obviously, they're champions. It doesn't matter. But they'll just be a little bit annoyed. Not the fact that they lost the game, but, there is people saying they were a little bit humiliated last night. So I'm sure Klopp, you could see it, his post-match interview last night after with Jeff Shreves, that he was angry, and there was shades of Tony O'Donoghue and Martin O'Neill in that one. But yeah, no, I think they'll bounce back and they'll beat Villa.
Is there any chance we're reading that one wrong, Phil? Like that, obviously Liverpool are now a team that maybe we saw some of the young players come off the bench last night. Maybe he leans a bit more on that. Villa are obviously fighting for their lives. Is there any chance that, because it came up in commentary last night as well, that Villa are going to feel this wrath at the weekend? Is there any chance we're reading that wrong?
No, I think if you look back at the performance for Liverpool against Palace, that's kind of what I'm expecting. He could make a few changes, but I don't think he'll make that many changes because he stuck up for his players after the match, and he'd probably say, right, lads, I'm after sticking up for you. I'm going to pick you again. You have to go out and prove me wrong and show that Thursday was just a little bit of a one-off. And even though they lost 4-0 last night, they actually could have scored 3 or 4 goals. If they'd lost that game 6-4, it wouldn't have been a surprise.
Next headline. United could give Liverpool and City a run fair, F-E-R with a capital F, their money next season. Bruno Fernandes continues to pull the strings for Manchester United. It's Manchester United against Bournemouth tomorrow at 3 o'clock, Phil. It's pretty easy to tell what's going to happen here, according to you.
Yeah, obviously. Well, Bournemouth look dead and buried now, losing 4-1 to Newcastle. One thing they always did under Eddie Howe was they scored goals. That's no longer happening. They've always conceded them. Manchester United are in great form. They're on this unbeaten run of 15 games in all competitions. Obviously, since Bruno Fernandes arrived, they've been a different looking side. I'll be honest with you, I didn't see this going so well from him. I'd seen him playing for Sporting Lisbon a good few times, and he looked like a player who just wasn't interested in being there, but maybe that's exactly what it was. He was just thinking, I want to get out, and when I join a new club, I'll show them exactly what I'm made of. But now United have a few weapons in the artillery where obviously Pogba's back in the team, but opposition defenders now have to think of a few different players, whereas the criticism for United was great going forward on the break because they have pace, but if you just put a low block in against them, they're not going to be able to unlock the defence. But that's gone now, and you just see Fernandes, even his goal the other night, the first goal, obviously it took a bit of a deflection, but just, he just has that presence of mind just to pull back a few yards, get himself on the D, and he's not shy of shooting. So I think United, it's been a great week for them. They obviously beat Brighton on Tuesday emphatically, then they watched Leicester and Chelsea lose, and then they'll be happy to see Liverpool thumped, even if it was against Manchester City, their neighbours. But we know the United supporters would rather see Liverpool suffer than Manchester City. So I think they'll definitely be fancying their chances of closing the gap on the top two next season. And, they might even bring in one or two more players before the start of next season as well.
Your second last headline this morning, Phil, is Arsenal no longer part of the Wolf Pack. So you're obviously expecting Wolves to get the job done against Arsenal tomorrow night. Is this a Champions League chasing six-pointer, or is that very generous in the prospects of Arsenal?
No, I think it's very generous on the prospect. If Arsenal win, all that's going to do is just put a dent in Wolves' pursuit of a Champions League place. As I said, we've obviously talked about Manchester City. That Court of Arbitration for Sport ruling in a couple of weeks is going to have a massive impact. Obviously, teams are trying to get into the top four because we don't know. You could finish fifth and think you're going to be in the Champions League, and then the ban could get overturned, and then you miss out in Champions League. So as things stand, we've got four teams chasing two spots, and Wolves are looking good. They were a team I feared for at the start of the season, given the fact that they started the season so early with the Europa League qualifiers. I think the break has suited them. They're not conceding goals. They're even leaving Traore on the bench for certain games, and then he comes on and just causes havoc. So I think the thoughts of Adama Traore getting a run at that Arsenal defence is fairly frightening for Gunners fans.
Yeah, it certainly is. And then last one is also a Champions League headline. What I'm seeing here is Leicester back on course to lock down Champions League place.
Yeah, obviously Leicester got the news that they can play at the King Power, even though Leicester is in lockdown. And I think this is actually a good game for them. And the second half was a lot more encouraging. They were pretty poor in the first half against Everton, but he brought on James Maddison, who obviously had a bit of an injury. He didn't show any signs of it in the second half at Goodison Park. Kelechi Iheanacho came on and gave Jamie Vardy a bit of help. And we know how good Vardy is, but you take away that space in behind him and he's not as effective. So I think this is the kind of game that they'll probably win, but I'm still not sure if Leicester are going to see this out. Are they going to get that top four finish? They could be the team that finishes fifth, and then if City get their ban overturned, they ultimately miss out. But yeah, this is a good game for them. I think Palace will probably just sit in and basically say to Leicester, here's the ball and see can you break us down. And the signs are from the other night at Goodison that Leicester probably should have enough that they could do it.
Okay, so to wrap up, the headlines are Liverpool still have 100 points inside thanks to home comforts. United could give Liverpool and City a run for their money next season. Bruno Fernandes continuing to pull the strings for United. Arsenal no longer part of the Wolf Pack. I think as my sub-editing advice to you, Phil, is go for WOLVE. It says WOLF here, so maybe you can edit that before Monday morning. And Leinster back on course to lock down Champions League place. Just before we let you go, Phil, Tottenham Hotspur last night, Jose Mourinho complaining about VAR. Of course, that is the big story this morning, and definitely not the case that Spurs are in a bit of bother. And despite having basically a full pre-season, Jose Mourinho hasn't exactly managed to steer the ship the way he wants it to go.
No, and actually, funny enough, there was moments in the first half where I thought, you know what, if he can sort out his defence, there's serious potential, because obviously Birdvine's come in, and Son, Mora, Harry Kane, you've got Sissoko there. You've got players that can play really well on the counter-attack. So, unfortunately for Mourinho, and it's just something that you don't associate with the Mourinho of the past, is he's playing with a team that doesn't have a solid defence. And we saw that in the United game when they were 1-0 up. They couldn't see it out. And obviously, he's leaving Alderweireld on the bench instead of Dyer, and that's one that's the head-scratcher, because whatever about Vertonghen and Alderweireld playing as a partnership, I think Alderweireld's a much better option than Eric Dyer. Every day of the week, I'd be going for that. But I can understand Mourinho's frustration with VAR, by the way, but it's actually more the handball rule. It's an absolute ridiculous rule that Lucas Moura gets pushed over, a ball is kicked off, and he doesn't know anything about it, and the ref rules it out. But we saw the same with the Mahrez goal that was ruled out last night as well for Phil Foden's handball. It's a ridiculous law that was brought in. The only way you can counter it, it seems, is to put your arms in, tuck them into your jersey and not have them out. And then obviously you can't play football properly.
It's quite the week for VAR, all told. I mean, you're missing the fact that Jose Mourinho's a class act, Phil. The biggest event last night where he, his big hug for Chris Wilder, I thought they were going to sort of get it on at one point. Very intimate moment.
Who doesn't like Chris Wilder? Chris Wilder seems like one of the most popular managers in the Premier League. But it's classic. Jose obviously taken away from the fact that his side were beaten by a team that were in really poor form going into the game. Don't score many goals, and they went 3-0 up on Spurs, and not good. And we know Mourinho is all about the second season, but you know, the reason Mourinho's at Tottenham is not because Tottenham is a job that really he wanted, but it was probably the only job that he could get in terms of a team at the time with a chance of getting Premier League or Champions League football. They were obviously still in the Champions League, but I think it's come a few years too late. And I think Daniel Levy loved the idea of being able to get Jose Mourinho, but I think, as I said, it's a few years too late.